Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at Jiro Taniguchi's Skyhawk. When I was at Mocha, I picked up all the Jiro Taniguchi work that I was missing from the Fanfare booth. The guys at Fanfare are always super awesome. I bought a whole bunch of stuff from them. They even went back to the hotel and got a book that they didn't have at the booth with them and gave it to me for free. Every time I buy stuff from them at a con, they're always super nice, and they make amazing books, so really excited about that. This one here is a really interesting piece from Taniguchi, and he's trying something very different than what I'm used to with him, which is a little bit like the slower contemplative stuff, like The Walking Man, or the more just like down to earth drama. This is a down to earth drama, but it's much more action packed than I'm used to in his work because it's basically samurai versus cowboys. It's Western, and you even get an introduction here from Moebius, Jean Giraud, talking about, what a great job Taniguchi's done, like adopting the Western, and also lamenting that in film you don't get Western anymore. So it's pretty interesting to see that the European market, and then at least in the case of Jiro Taniguchi, the Japanese market, have more interest in the Western than we Americans do. It seems, my sense is that like the Wild West is a very heroic thing for them, whereas to us, as is part of this book, it's part of our complicated past, so we don't really dig into it as much. But Moebius here celebrates, that thank goodness to comic books we don't need Hollywood anymore, and especially thank goodness to people like Jiro Taniguchi who are such great comic artists. So this book follows two Japanese gentlemen who used to be samurais. They fled in a battle that their clan was losing, and they came to America, and now they're living in America, and they're going to get hooked up with the Sioux Indians, I believe. What's really interesting about this is that because they're martial artists, this is also like a martial arts book. So it's like a cowboy book, a Western, also a martial arts book. And here you get them doing like a hip toss. The first time they encounter someone that doesn't know martial arts, they do a hip toss. And then, so they're going to they hook up with Crazy Horse here, and he gets interested in their jujitsu. And it's interesting too because it looks to me like they're practicing the original jujitsu, which is Japanese, which is a more complete fighting system. It looks like it has a lot more standing, like judo takedowns and locks and stuff like that, versus the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which I'm more familiar with, which is more ground fighting. But it's cool to see because you can tell all the moves that are in the book and stuff are really accurately researched and accurately pulled off. I don't know how effective any of that would actually be, like in a fight against guns, but it makes for a good story. One of the cool things is to see someone like Jiro Taniguchi trying to expand his style. So here on like this frontispiece for chapter 2, you can really see him trying to lean into Giroud's like pen and ink style that he uses when he works on Blueberry, especially the early stuff where he's imitating JJ to some extent. You really see an attempt at that style here. Now, I will say that's the biggest detractor in this book, is I don't think that's within Taniguchi's abilities, and he gets better at it by the end, but he's just not someone who works with thick area of blacks very well. Like a lot of these shapes don't look like whacked in with the brush, which is what someone like Moebius would be doing. You just get that all in one stroke and be done with it. This looks like a shape that's like drawn out, outlined, and then filled in, and it just doesn't have that same energy that you would get. I think Taniguchi A has a real trouble spotting blacks, and B is just someone who works better with delicacy in his art. So you can see here a good example of that, where the Americans are killing. Well, I shouldn't say the Americans. The American government, the white men, are coming in and intentionally killing all of the buffalo because that's going to diminish the quality of life of the tribes. And so you get this where you get actually Taniguchi doing some decent brush rendering, but it's a little clunky and clumpy, versus these kind of things which are much more in his wheelhouse. These very delicate stuttered lines, rendering, super dense rendering of background and environment and things like that. But when you get to him drawing like the coats, again, it gets clogged up feeling, it gets stiff feeling. It doesn't look like someone who's comfortable with the brush, and it also oftentimes looks like, because of the discomfort with the brush, like I said, things are drawn out and then colored in. Like this right here, the way these are drawn to me is fairly amateur compared to how beautiful his background work and how beautiful his figure work is when he's not leaning into the black. This is a really cool action scene here, but you can see the same problem. Like when he's got minimal black and just kind of thin lines, or he's kind of doing the Jiro hatching here to some extent, but these cleaner figures, anywhere where he's using tone, he's a real master of using the zip tone. And so that is always the best part of the book. And then where he's trying to do the kind of Western look, it gets better as it goes. But there are just a lot of fun scenes in here too, where you do get this more action-packed cowboys versus ex-samurai, and you can see that here. And it's pieces like this that I think work. It's that kind of, you can see Urasawa probably took a lot of influence from Taniguchi. There's definitely got to be some back and forth with Otomo. Like this strikes me as very kind of Otomo style rendering and Otomo style composition. So that's where the successful stuff is at, of course. I also think Taniguchi, he's pretty good at the action, but a little bit stiffer than a lot of the manga artists, so that's interesting to see. And I think that's where I see the Urasawa, is like Urasawa took this rendering style and then brought some of the more action into it, a little bit better at the action, took it like in that route, but still with some of the attentiveness to background details and things like that. I also get the sense that Taniguchi does all of the work himself, because he is such a master of tone. I've done a review of a book, Tokyo is My Garden, where he was just the artist on the tones. And so that's something that he seems to have mastered particularly well. And his interest really does, his strength seems to lie in the backgrounds and the environment. Like his character work is great, but it's actually, I should say it's good. His character work's good. It's passable. He's willing to do a lot of work and pack it with a lot of people, but where he really shines is in the backgrounds, and especially his use of the tones for that. So like these two panels here, I don't think these are photocopies. These, this isn't what you would get in a modern manga where you have like a photocopy that's been turned into tone on Photoshop or something. You can actually see like, okay, this is constructed entirely out of 2 layers of tone, or it looks like 3 layers of tone here. And with the trees and everything, you can tell it's all hand drawn. There's no Photoshop manipulation. You can see each little tick mark, and it's just really beautiful stuff. I'm sure he's looking at photo reference. Maybe he is tracing over a blue line of a photograph or something. I don't know, but like each tree is an individual tree. It's not a stamp of trees. It's just this really highly observed stuff. So these type of images throughout are really beautiful. Anyways, in terms of the story, you have these 2 guys from Japan that link up with this group of Native American Indians. They save a woman, and they save her baby as well, and the baby gets a Japanese name. And then they hook up with Running Horse, and they basically just go live with the Indians for the rest of their life. And so, well, actually at the end they switch, but they go live with the Indians for many years, teach them the jiu-jitsu, learn their way of life. And then as the American government continues to break its treaties that it's made about leaving certain land alone and things like that, there start to be more and more battles. And then you eventually meet General Custer here, and you can see another one of these really awesome battle scenes. They're coming in, and they're bringing in miners to dig out gold, and then eventually they go to the Black Hills, which is like the sacred land for many of the Native American groups. And so that starts to be a lot of battles, and these Japanese warriors here get involved in these final battles. So here we've now had like a time jump. This is 3 years later. The little girl's grown up a little bit. They've been living with the Indian tribe for 3 months, and we're leading up to basically Custer's last stand is the end of the book. Here you get what looks to me like Taniguchi really looking at Moebius, or maybe even Moebius collaborating on this one. And this just looks so Moebius to me. or maybe someone like out of Mizuki's stable did the background on this. This is like how Mizuki would draw rocks. But all of this cross-hatching here just looks very different and very competent with the style in a way that I haven't seen in other Jiro Taniguchi stuff. So this rock here is really interesting to me to see who did it. But again, you see all this amazing tone work that I think is Taniguchi himself, since I've seen him do just that in other books. This is actually kind of funny here. This is obviously a book that is anti-American colonialization. It's looking at all the awful things we did to steal this land, and trying to celebrate the Indians, or the Native Americans. But as with a lot of stories like this, I think there's still, even though this one doesn't have a white knight, it's got two Japanese knights. So there's always still a sense of exceptionalism in these stories. Like I think of the movie Avatar and how that's supposed to be all celebrating of these natural tribal people, and we're coming in and industrial running them over, but like we still need a white guy to be smart enough to realize to fly above the dragon instead of below it. Like that story undermines itself. I think this one undermines itself a little bit because there is a hint of like some Japanese exceptionalism in here. So they're saying, they're reporting back like, hey, we got in this fight with the Sioux. They came and messed us up. They had stockades. They took us by surprise. And he said they disrupted our battle formations with bow and arrow attacks and cut our battle lines to ribbons. And Custer asked, was it Skyhawk, which is the name of one of the two Japanese guys now. That's like his Indian name. And then, did you see him? Yes. I've never seen such a fearless, determined Indian before. So there's like this Japanese exceptionalism, the way of the Bushido, the skills of the jujitsu, their archery skills are better and stuff. And so there's still, even within this kind of like anti-Western colonialism, there's still a sense of Japanese exceptionalism in the story, which I find to undermine it a bit, but also, like whatever. It's just a thing. It doesn't bother me, but it's just funny to see it couched in the story. Like that, we can't get past that. It's not just a white Western thing. Another thing that I really enjoyed throughout the book is there will be like new chapters, and they'll start with the month when the body fattens, or the month when the trees freeze, or things like that. I'm sure that's through research, finding out like how the Native American, or at least the Sioux tribe, described the passing of time. And that makes a lot more sense to me, instead of these arbitrary divisions like, hey, it's May. It's like, hey, this is when the trees blow pollen, the time when the trees blow pollen, and that your life would be constructed around actual events like that. Like, here's the 3-week span in which pollen is blowing. We don't necessarily have to go to this arbitrary subdivision of 30 or 31 or whatever. So I kind of like that. That makes a lot of sense to me, and it was fun to see what those divisions are for them. And then this is just an example here. If this is Taniguchi doing all the rendering, I'm a little bit unsure. I think some like this one really looks like he's collaborating with someone else, but you can see here that he's gotten much better at this rendering style. It looks like he's leaned into actually using a brush instead of like drawing everything out and filling it in. So by the end of the book, he has to some extent been able to inhabit that lineage from JJ through Jean Giraud. There's even some like this here where he's like doing heavier cross-hatching on the face with still a lot of the tone rendering. That looks very different for him. So he's definitely adding to his repertoire throughout the book, which is fun to watch. I still think by the end, that's just not his natural inclination. His natural inclination is the cleaner lines and stuff like that, and the more mellow type of stories. But being such a great artist is able to make like a really well told Western story with a beautiful art all throughout. And any of the areas where the art's like lacking a little bit, like maybe the blue coats, I don't like the way those are drawn, but everything else is so gorgeous, it's so engaging, it doesn't really matter. So I had to be wondering throughout this whole piece whether this was a real story, whether there were two ex-samurais who actually did like hook up with the Sioux and get involved with Crazy Horse's battle against Custer, or if that was entirely fictional. I was about ready to go to the internet and look that up, especially because on the last page here, the story is pretty much justified in saying that this little girl that they saved, Sakura, that her and some of the people fled to Canada when Crazy Horse surrendered, and that these two Japanese guys headed to Canada as well, and that they brought Skyhawk and then Windswolf, which is the name of the other Japanese guy, his Indian name, brought this girl with her. And there's a photograph, supposedly a portrait of photograph of a lone Indian woman, and a researcher thought it was strange that her name was Sakura, because that was a Japanese name for like a type of flower. And so that kind of suggests to me that Taniguchi actually found evidence. He found this photo, he heard this story, and it was like, oh, that, you know, like there must have been some Japanese influence there somehow, and then extrapolated from that or done more research and found out the real story. But then in his afterword here, he basically just says that he wanted to do a Western, that he had a heavy influence from the bande dessinée scene and wanted to do a Western in that style, but also wanted to include Japanese characters. So he did some history about when the Japanese immigrated to America, and who they were and what kind of things they got involved in. But he does admit that this is basically fiction. So I don't know, he didn't address this photograph specifically. I don't know if there actually is a photograph like this out there with a woman that has a Japanese name up in Canada, or if that's fictional as well. That's something I would have to research, but it's an interesting approach, because so much of the story is based in heavily researched fact, that it sucks you into the drama. So this is just, as with all Taniguchi books, really well written, gorgeous art to look at, super nice production. I will say the production on this one, even though the line work is perfectly crisp and stuff, there are mores all throughout most of the dot tones, which I'm not used to seeing from the Fanfare books. The Fanfare is usually some of the crispest production I've ever seen. So I don't know what kind of assets they had, if they had things that were already pre-adjusted, but it's their typical great print job. It's just there's moire in the tones, which I'm not used to seeing from Fanfare. But other than that, a beautiful book through and through, beautifully written, beautifully illustrated, beautifully produced. So if you haven't got this, I know this has been out for a while, but this or any other Jiro Taniguchi work is definitely well worth the read. And if you want to see one where you have, a Japanese, like a legendary mangaka trying to swerve into a European kind of approach to comics and mix the two, this is a really good one to see. So see if you can grab yourself a copy of it. It's definitely worth grabbing. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and want to support us so we can keep making content like this, there's two ways to do that. The first one is through our Patreon. There's two different tiers of engagement on there. At the first tier, you just get early access to our videos. At the second tier, you get exclusive access to the ongoing web experiment comic that we're doing, where there's user interaction, so you can vote to control what's going on in Prane's day as he cycles through this Groundhog Day loop. You can help determine what he tries next to get out of the loop. Sean and I also post exclusive sneak peeks at the personal projects that we're working on, personal graphic novels and art projects, things like that. Any of the money we get from Patreon goes back into buying the books that we review, so we try and put that right back into the industry, and then it just keeps us in books to share with you all. The best way to support Living the Line itself is to support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing, so we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his projects now. The Eisner-nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book, Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell, when you get into the theories about what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe button and the like button and the bell, and then you get them.